Hello everyone, my name is Sinead Obeng. For the day job, I work as a gas and power regulatory affairs advisor at Gazprom Marketing and Trading, and I also chair the Young Professionals Council at the Energy Institute. Now, I've been a member of the Energy Institute for about 6 years, and as a member of the EI, I've always noticed the great importance that it places on its young professional members, which is why I feel incredibly honoured to represent them on the Governing Council of Trustees. So, the million-dollar question we're posing today is, how do we build a global energy system fit for the future? Climate change is an intergenerational emergency, compounded by the need to ensure energy security. So by energy security, we mean reliable, affordable energy access for all, particularly for the billions of people still living without adequate access. As professionals under 35, working in energy or studying energy-related topics, we will be the industry's leaders in 2050, and we will inherit a sector that will be judged on how it's responded. And this is where Generation 2050 comes in. So today we're launching Generation 2050, a project initiated by the EI, its global young professionals networks, and our supporting partners, including IBM, Repsol Sinopec, Energy UK Energy Professionals Forum, and the University Alliance. So thank you all for being part of this. So Generation 2050 has 3 key aims. Firstly, distilling and amplifying a positive vision for change in response to these global urgent emergencies. Secondly, to convey to today's energy leaders the views and opinions of those who will actually inherit the sector and the planet after them. And thirdly, to inspire young people to stay in the sector and also encourage others to join it. At the heart of 2050 is a survey that some of you may have seen this morning, and that's launching today with this event to capture the views and perspectives from around the world, and especially the views of you guys. So for those of you that are under 35 and that are working in energy or studying energy-related topics, please, after the webinar, visit the Generation 2050 webpage and complete the survey if you haven't already. The survey is currently circulating, but we've made it really easy for you, so it will actually pop up after the end of this webinar as well. So let's actually get to the discussion. You're going to hear some very short, punchy key thoughts from some of our young professional branches in Nigeria, the Middle East, Asia Pacific, and Aberdeen here in the UK. We've asked them both, each of them, to select a topic that they will provide their views on from where they sit regionally, but also their perspectives from either their studies or their work. And we also have the president of the Energy Institute, who will be taking us through his high-level thoughts on diversity and inclusion. So in terms of the structure, we're going to have a quick fire poll before each presentation, where you can scan, that's it, it's up there. So you can scan the QR code using your camera, and that will take you straight to the poll. If that's not working, you simply go to menti.com and you can type in the code on screen 200351, and then you should be able to participate in the poll. So first up, we have Kelvin from the Nigeria branch. And to kick off his presentation, we'll start with the first poll question that hopefully will work. What will the essential skill set of successful energy leaders in the future look like? So will it be A, specialist technical and engineering skills, B, broad strategic, collaborative and engagement skills, or C, all of the above? So Calvin will be talking about leadership for the energy system of the future, and I'll give you, great, we already have some answers coming in as well. And as that's coming in, I'll hand over to Kelvin. Kelvin, over to you.
Hello, Sinead. Good morning, and thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And I'd like to start off by saying that it is no longer news that over 600 million homes do not have access to electricity in Sub-Saharan Africa, at least. Now, the worry is that gap closing up, or is it widening the more? Now, we have recently noticed increasing, trends in the climate effects, in Africa, Lagos, for example, and some other parts of Africa. You notice that there are more floods. Of course, many times people will tell you that this flood is as a result of, poor drainage system and all. But also, you also notice that there are spikes in temperature at different seasons, at different points in time. And most importantly is that we also cannot argue the fact that gas flaring in Nigeria and also plastic disposal, all this contributes to the effects of climate change in Nigeria. I think it will also be good to note that Africa is the second largest continent in the world, right? And with over 1.3 billion people. And interestingly, Nigeria, maybe not interesting, maybe disturbing, is very disturbing also because with Nigeria having a population of over 190 million people, and over 60% of this population are young people. Now, the question really is, what is going to happen to these young people, especially when it comes to the energy sector? What contribution do these young people have to make, right? And are these young people prepared really, to take over the sector? Now, I think with the sort of dynamics we have in Nigeria and in Africa, it's important to note that the sort of leaders that multi-skilled leaders are versatile, flexible, in a sense, we can say T-shaped leaders. Something that used to happen way before now in Nigeria, different parts of Nigeria, is that parents would usually send their children probably after secondary education. So they are sent to, learn a trade from an industry leader. So where they get to, they are groomed, really. And at a point, you realize that they don't just learn the technicalities of the business, right? They also get to learn the business side of things and also the human side. Now, you notice that there's a constant handshake, between these leaders at that point in time and the young professionals that have been trained at that point in time. So now this constant handshake is actually required many times for the transition to be smooth, and to be seamless. I would like to take a deeper look into the attitude of leadership in Nigeria. Now, attitude, because I would like to look at it from 3 different points of view. First is attitude of current energy leaders, to young professionals. And then attitude of young professionals to current energy leaders, and then attitude of young professionals to the industry. Now, many times you realize that current leaders, of course, make statements like, these young professionals, they always want to be disruptive, they always want to innovate, they're not serious, they're not ready to learn, they're not patient enough and all. And of course, because of that, the opportunities really are limited. And even if these opportunities come, many times you realize that a lot of young professionals do not have access to these opportunities. Now, for young professionals, you realize many times also that there's this, lack of willingness to go to industry leaders, for example, for mentorship, or to even ask for opportunities for apprenticeship. And also one important aspect is the attitude of young professionals to the industry. Do they have the right motivation? Do they have what's exactly the passion? What's the drive? Why are they in the industry? What are they looking up to? What are they planning for the industry really? How do they want to solve challenges? How do they want to solve problems? How do they want to close gaps? So really at the end of the day, you realize that the sort of leadership that's needed is that which allows young professionals to acquire the right knowledge, skills, and attitude. But to acquire this, of course, we have to go back to the basics, which is mentorship, apprenticeship, more internships really, and then more training, because these things are also very important. Now, to conclude my point, I would like to ask 2 key questions. And the first question I'll direct to the current industry leaders. And the question is, what sort of future leader are we looking out for? This as regards to current leaders. What sort of future leaders are you looking out for? What sort of leaders do you want to be able to take over the industry? What sort of leaders do you want to be able to achieve the things that that are needed in the industry? And then the second question goes to young professionals, and this also includes myself, right? And the question is, what sort of leaders do we want to become? how do we want to solve problems? What dimension do we want to take? Are we prepared to be T-shaped leaders? Are we prepared to be able to, acquire the right knowledge, skills, and attitude? Because that's really what competence is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Calvin. Fantastic, a very inspirational presentation. I think it's really important to address both our current leaders and also our future leaders, so we can kind of make sure that as the leadership roles transition, we can really understand if we're meeting the skills gap and the requirements that are needed. I failed to mention at the beginning of the presentations that if you do have any questions, you'll see the box on the right-hand side of the webinar. So if you can direct your questions to EI host, or actually Energy, to Energy Institute, then those will be collated at the end and we'll address them. So next up, it's my pleasure to welcome Shada from the Middle East branch. She's based in Dubai, and she's going to be talking about policy and regulation for the energy system of the future. So if we move to the next poll question, we want to get your views on whether you believe the right local policies are in place for a resilient global energy system. So by local policies, we mean the policies that relate to where you're situated in the world. And feel free to answer this question from whichever perspective speaks to you most. We acknowledge that it's a very broad and wide global system, and you may be looking at it from completely different sectors, but this conversation is about taking the time to bring those all together and to really get the views from our members. So looking at the poll coming in, we haven't got any yet. A resounding no so far, which is very interesting. And as those are coming in, I'll hand over to Shada. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sinead. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that there is plenty for improvement, or at least that's what a lot of people agree. Yeah, I think I'll share with you some of perhaps my thoughts and my ideas about what we need to have in place today in order to ensure that we have a resilient global energy system that is fit for the future. So I think if we perhaps go to the next slide, yeah, I can walk you through some of my ideas. I'm starting with the idea and the need to reignite the drive towards global decarbonization. I think that in the past, one of the key barriers to decarbonization has been a lack of commitment at a global level. I think this drive was actually strong during the lead up to COP21, and that kind of led to many parties or countries ratifying and signing the binding Paris Agreement. But now we need to really not be complacent, and we need to continue our work towards achieving affordable and clean energy for all, as well as some of the other sustainable development goals that we're working towards achieving. I think that grassroots movements that are started and fueled by young professionals and the leaders of tomorrow can really have a huge impact on the decisions taken by organizations and even governments. We were all witness to how the Greta Thunberg movement became a worldwide sensation in a matter of days, and hopefully that will also have an impact on global future policies and regulations. We've also seen how the global community came together in our response to COVID-19 and the pandemic, just because that was an immediate threat to our safety and security. If we were to kind of leverage on that social cohesion and really use that worldwide reaction, then we can really transform the attitudes towards decarbonization, and we can really drive the transition to a low carbon economy. And that kind of brings me to my second point, actually, and how diversifying our energy mix should really be on everyone's agenda. I think looking at some of the policies like tax exemptions, financial incentives, net metering, public-private partnerships, and so on, these are all some of the measures that can be taken just in order to make renewable energy more feasible in terms of an economic point of view. But then also when we're looking at some of the decreasing costs in renewable energy technologies, and we might hear that in the coming sections as well from other speakers, but the decreasing costs coupled with the increasing efficiencies can really make renewable energies more feasible and more favorable options to adopt. Now looking at some of the recent events with the recent drop in oil prices and so on, which can actually be perceived as a challenge to the renewable energy penetration, but it should still not deter policymakers from looking at the long-term picture and still pursuing the goal of sustainable development and looking at clean energy options and so on. Here in the Middle East region, even though that the region is mostly reliant on fossil fuels and so on, we're still looking at some ambitious goals and targets for clean energy. For example, in Dubai here where I am, there is a target of achieving 25% of our energy mix from clean energy by 2030 and 75% by 2050. Of course, that being said, there needs to be a lot of work on actually implementing these strategies and making sure that we're optimizing our energy mix and making sure that we're pursuing that goal. Globally, governments are also working with a lot of private sector companies and organizations, as well as some research hubs in order to come up with more innovative ways of doing more with less, and basically to ensure that sustainable growth is achieved. I think that the EI, the Energy Institute, is also collaborating with local solar mega initiatives to also kind of develop policies and guidelines for the solar sector, solar energy sector here in the region. Of course, looking at some of the other reforms to the global energy systems, we would have to look at the movement towards decentralization. Decentralization would bring about a huge change in the energy sector, in the business, as well as in the current dynamics. So looking at our power supply, it will continue to be reliant now and in the future to a somewhat large extent on conventional fuel sources. Of course, that's because of the growing global energy demand, as well as the intermittent nature of renewables. Now, the idea is that we need to have the right policies in place in order to actually drive that change and to make sure that we have flexible and decentralized energy systems that are also scalable, and they're also capable of ramping up generation and to compensate for the varying nature of renewables. I think we'll also need to reimagine and restructure the infrastructure that is currently existing in order to make sure that we're providing reliable supply of energy to areas that are currently off-grid and do not have a reliable source. I think looking at all of those ideas, it's mostly to ensure that we have an agile method of power delivery and to ultimately ensure that we have energy access and energy security for all. I might be a bit over time perhaps, but I just think that these ideas, along with others that you might be passionate about, and you can tell us more about those in the survey and so on, but these should all be highlighted hopefully in the coming COP26, and hopefully that will drive change and ensure that our energy systems, our global energy systems, are fit for the future. Thank you.
Absolutely, Sharla. Thank you very much for that. And I think you raise a really good point. You know, although decentralization is incredibly important, we need to ensure that our policies facilitate the complex processes, the infrastructure burdens, the significant amount of investments that go into achieving this, especially on the technology side, which I think leads us on quite nicely to Abdul's presentation. So Abdul joins us from Malaysia, and he'll be talking about technology for the energy system of the future. So our poll question is going to test your general knowledge a little bit. We want to know whether you think that, according to the UN, by 2050, what percentage of the world's population will live in cities? So will it be 55 to 60% according to the UN, 60 to 65%, 65 to 70%, or 70% to 75%? So let's take a look at your views so far. Wait for those to come in. Seems to be quite close between 65% to 70 and 75%. So essentially, we acknowledge that it's going to be a large number. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Abdul. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sinead. So as I can see, most of the participant answered correctly, which lays in the answer number C, which is 65 to 70% of the projected world population in 2050. Now, the exact number that should be 68%, which will make up about 6.6 billion of the population by 2050. So there is important point that we need to highlight here. So according to 2020, the world population is 7.7 billion, and 55% of that are basically living in urban cities. So that makes 4 billion. So as we move toward 2050, which is 30 years from now, we are seeing an increase of about 2 billion in terms of population. So that 2 billion plus 500 million of the current population will be moving toward urbanized cities. And very importantly to notice is that majority of the growth that we can see tend to actually be in urban cities. So there comes the question actually, which need to be answered by everyone, specifically how we are going to cater toward the future. And the answer to that challenging situation, that as we are seeing people or population growth, how we're going to cater for that growth will be basically simply in that sense, potential solution to that will be smart cities. So that actually leads me to my presentation for today. So as we can see, basically for smart cities, you might actually be curious what smart cities stand for. So they tend to be actually cities that are urban cities that leverages basically the technology solution to improve the experiences of the residents. And it basically utilizes Internet of Things sensors, network application that gathers relevant information such as traffic, congestion, energy usage, and then also air quality. So when we talk about smart cities, we need to understand the component that makes smart cities smart, or a city smart. And that actually categorizes in 5 main points, which is big data as first point. So in big data and Internet of Things, usually Internet of Things is an essential technology. So without it, a smart city initiatives cannot exist. Secondly would be sensors. So sensors usually are the core device of every Internet of Things system, from basically connected cars to traffic lights, smart homes. Most every device today that we see have sensors embedded in them to help us basically gather data into a cloud where we can create certain patterns out of that data. From there, we can actually develop new technology or understand how we can control the flow of data, where we develop in the future better solutions basically. So third point, that will be 5G, which is one of the most impressive technologies that we are currently developing. And I believe many countries around the world is growing their own 5Gs, building it around cities. So with the smart connectivity, it will basically allow us to work faster, smoother, and gives us the efficiency that we need. And fourth point, that will be the geospatial technology. So when it comes to building a smart city, we need to understand that not any location can be used to build a smart city. So there need to be a specific technology that allow us to have geolocation accuracy and detailed graphic data in order to have a specific location where we can build a smart city. And fifth and last, that should be robotics. So maybe in the past, we used to consider robotics as something kind of sci-fi, but nowadays, actually, they exist simply in a majority of the developed countries. And one of the impressive, actually, new decisions that were made by Japan in the Tokyo Olympics is that they have this robotics, or robots, which actually assist the tourists that are coming for Olympic 2020 in translating for whatever, let's say communication, assisting in communicating. So that actually somehow assist in overall easy communication between people and simply assist in overall communication, I could say. So jumping to the third point, that will be what do we expect actually, or how would 2050 will look like? And that is actually a very important question. So mainly based on smart cities, we have 2 points, which are optimization and also utilization. So when we talk about optimization, currently we realize that specifically it's based on a case study in Malaysia conducted. In 2019, we have had approximately 6 billion Malaysian ringgit lost due to electricity theft. So when we speak about smart city, basically one of the core element that make a smart city a very useful in order to optimize, let's say, our electricity or our energy, is that it will avoid such an accident from happening, such as electricity theft. So that 6 billion, let's say, Malaysian ringgit in our situation or in our case could have been actually funded into a more useful activities or to be given to the population here in Malaysia for other useful development. So that's as one point, optimization, and then we can say utilization. So with the technologies that are embedded or developed in smart cities, such as sensors, they could be embedded into buildings and infrastructures that will help incorporate the renewable energy, such as solar energy. So one good example of that would be Solar City as a company. They basically uses the tiles on top of the houses in a specific way. They design it so it looks a normal roof, but it's actually a solar panel. So if we can reimagine how a smart city normally can be built in a normal building towers, but except of using a normal glass, it could be utilizing that where solar panels could be installed in such a way that it does not look in such a distractive way. And you may say it could be very unique and attractive. Secondly, underutilization would be the sensors that could be embedded in the highways. So they only turn when they are used. As we can see, sometime between cities, we realize that there isn't a street light on certain areas between states, and so sometimes that causes accidents, and it has its own complication that actually to a certain degree produces a negative outcome. So if, let's say, sensors could be embedded into highways where you may develop a full highways with a lighting system or traffic system where it basically is used, or it turns on only when it's used. So in such a way that instead of having it turned on 12 hours a day, it will only be turned only when it's used. So this way, it kind of utilizes the technology of smart cities, but also when they are not being used, they can reserve basically and sustain the equipment themselves, and also help in having a longer life shelf of the equipment, but also less funding needed basically to spend on such a maintenance of such a technology. And in the meantime, they also could be very helpful to the people that are living in that particular area. So this way, not only they help in reducing funds, but also they help the population of the people to have more efficient lifestyle, more simpler life, and more safer in such a way. And so with that, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Abdul. I think it's really fascinating to see how the advances in technology that are happening now will actually transform even further as we look to 2050. And of course, I think we're probably going to see more subcategories of expertise in tech that relate to the energy industry. And I'm really excited to see kind of how young professionals can develop their skills in order to be equipped for those kind of roles in the future. So that brings us on nicely to Zubin's presentation. Zubin is based in the Aberdeen branch, and he will be talking about people and skills for the energy system of the future. So our fourth poll question: does your organization currently have plans to train and develop you for the skills required for the energy transition? Do you think your individual organization does? And if you're not working, feel free to look at it from the perspective of your studies. And so far, it's a resounding yes, which is actually fantastic to hear. But there's still a significant number that feel like they don't know or they don't think so. So while those results are coming, Zubin, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sinead. So I'd like to talk around three main topics. So if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I'd like to talk around three main topics, and it's broadly around skills, culture, and societal impact. So just to begin with, I've got some interesting statistics to begin. They're quite UK-centric, so do bear with me. So the first one is around the skills category. So Ernst & Young conducted a survey of the energy industry and actually found that over 81% of executives agree that industry will need to develop a better educated, highly skilled workforce over the next 10 years, which is quite an interesting statistic. Moving on to the culture side, in 2019, the OG UK conducted a survey and found that the average age of offshore workers in 2018 was around 43 years. And this is actually fairly closely mirrored by the onshore office-based staff as well. So broadly speaking, there's quite a senior workforce that we currently have in the UK sector, with quite a number of staff actually getting closer to retirement age. So finally, onto the society topic. Credence UK conducted a survey and found that 2/3 of students would not actually consider a career in oil and gas. And for them, working for an ethical company was a big requirement for them. So if you could just click on to the next transition. Thank you very much. So I'll just go on to talk about some of these individual topics in a bit more detail. So if we focus on the skills element. So especially with the current age of the industry being more senior, current young professionals will be expected to step up into leadership positions very soon. And that's purely out of necessity, given the current age demographic. As a result, we need to be tooled up and skilled appropriately. Ernst & Young in that same survey argued that if the industry enabled more use of AI, or artificial intelligence, big data, and new technology, it would help address the skills gap and actually attract more top talent. What does this actually mean? Well, this could mean training opportunities in areas such as coding, or perhaps developing transferable skills such as project management or financial acumen. These can be applied to not only large oil and gas capital projects, but to renewable projects such as wind farms, for example. Other possible opportunities could be cross-discipline moves to help broaden your skill base. So this would involve essentially moving to another job role that is not your core skills, and just broadening either your technical or your interpersonal skills in those sort of moves. If we now focus on to the culture element, senior management needs to be willing to embrace these new technologies and ways of working. The energy industry still has that mantra of let's not break what is working, and the industry needs to adapt with the times or risk being left behind. The current pandemic crisis has shown that there are different ways of working, and actually having the flexibility is quite key. One great scheme I have heard about is reverse mentoring. So reverse mentoring actually pairs younger employees with executive team members to mentor them on various topics of strategic and cultural relevance. This has the ultimate aim to try and drive cultural change within an organization. My last point on culture is around young talent, and there needs to be an investment in them today. And this neatly brings me on to the societal impact. Bloomberg, in an article late last year, highlighted the number of graduates going into oil and gas has plummeted since 2013. There needs to be a realization that more young people need to be convinced to join the energy industry. Most oil and gas companies are already on the path of energy transition and will become the biggest capital spenders in alternative energy in the coming decades. The industry isn't being seen in a favorable light now, and as a result, the talent isn't willing to join the industry. That perception needs to change. The investment in young talent needs to be made now, otherwise it will be too late, especially with the challenging demographics in the industry. You know, on a personal note, even in my company, there is a big spread of demographics with quite a lot of senior staff close to retirement age, and then a lot of staff at the younger age, less than 10 years experience, and there's kind of a vacuum in the middle. That kind of really highlights the issue that's going to face the industry in the coming decades. Ultimately, we as young professionals and future graduates need to drive to create a better world, and this challenge will be up to us. So we need to come up with the ideas and push forward that cultural change, and also be willing to take on the mantra of developing the skills in our own way. So that's me. So thanks for listening to my talk.
Zubin, thanks a lot for that. And thanks for sharing your very pragmatic thoughts on, I guess, how we can challenge some of the narrative about people and skills for the future. You know, particularly as oil and gas companies are working quite hard for the energy transition, and what that means for us as young professionals to better equip the industry for the future. So next up, it's my pleasure to present Steve, the Eis President, and he will be talking on diversity and inclusion for the energy system of the future. Over to you, Steve.
Sinead, thank you. Hello, everybody. Let me just say how delighted I am to be here. It's fantastic, this event, hopefully the first of many, led by the young professionals around the world. Now, I think my remarks shouldn't surprise anybody. Anyone who's heard me talk on this subject before, I'm just going to repeat what I've said, but it is unfortunately a necessity to keep repeating it. You know, we've got 10 years, in my view, to deliver on sustainable goal number 7, which is access to affordable, reliable energy by 2030. But the same decade is also going to be crucial to get us on the right track for net zero and really heading down. If we don't in the next 10 years, it's just going to be too late. And this is the decade of delivery. So it's so nice to hear other people, younger people, also understanding that some of the things that people are talking about, it's time to stop talking and take some action on here. We've got 4 corners of the world all saying pretty much the same thing. So that's really inspirational. Because at the end of the day, as you're all observing, those of us that are old are retiring. There's a huge opportunity. You know, you're going to take on this mantle. You're going to be the leaders who are going to not just lead this industry, but can inherit all the challenges around the planet and the problems. But diversity and inclusion sits at the heart of some of these solutions as well. And it's very close to my heart. And you might say, when you're looking at a panel of diverse young people, what is a white old age man doing talking about this subject? And I've no apology for it, actually. On the contrary, if we don't get a lot of people who are the leaders of energy organizations at the moment to realize the role they have to play, to take some real action to change things, then we're going to have a problem. And that's what this agenda is really all about. You know, we've got to change the culture in our sector. We've got to make sure that the differences are valued as opposed to looking all the time for almost clones of those that have gone before. And that, of course, gets into talking about gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, disability, absolutely everything. And there's got to be a cry for action, which I'll come on to, which is happening in some parts already, but there's more to do. Certainly when I took over as the president for my 2-year term, I talked about, I wanted to really impress on a sector that is extraordinary what it's achieved. It's achieved so much in terms of improving the life of billions around the planet, but that it can't rest on its laurels. You know, this is a major challenge. And as an engineer, I like some facts. You've got some facts in front of you, as the other speakers have shown that, and this won't surprise you. You probably know these statistics. You probably know them in your own countries anyway. But the global statistics are really interesting to me. You know, they speak for themselves here. You know, the oil and gas workforce is less than half the norm of female representation. And you'd kind of think, at least I'd have kind of thought, that some of the newer industries that are coming through, like renewables, well, they're probably okay, aren't they? Well, they're not, no. You know, they're behind as well, compared to what a normal workforce would be like. But don't be fooled by those stats either, because they're a hell of a sight worse than those numbers are showing you. Because if you take out an awful lot of females who are working in administrative and low paid roles, when you come up through the seniority of organizations, then the story is an awful lot worse. So even if those numbers looked a bit better, and let's face it, they don't to start with, they actually are masking a situation that I think is worse than it is. And the expression I often use when I'm talking about this subject with leaders in the industry is, the progress is glacial. And I often sarcastically remark, I kind of quite like to see these numbers jump long before I'm not going to be around to actually see them. There's an initiative in the UK called Powerful Women, and that has data across all of the energy industry. And it certainly talks about the boardrooms as well. And the drive to try and ensure that we've got representation in the boardrooms of the UK listed entities has been really, really successful, with one notable exception, and that's the energy industry. 38% of the top energy boardrooms in the UK have no women at all. So it is, as a sector, the worst sector of all. The worst. It's just so counterintuitive to me that the energy sector that leads on so many fronts, so on this front, it actually is bottom of the pile. And you'll all know, you know, with you've touched on to a certain extent, I think, you know, the persistent number of girls and young women that are studying science and technology subjects, of course, you know, is part of the problem, but it's a pretty poor place to go back to and say that's the heart of it. It is a tremendous career option for men and women, and we've got to sell it, as some of the other speakers have said, a lot better than we are today. If I move on to minority groups, well, the data's in pretty short supply, actually, and that tells you something, that people haven't been measuring it in a sense. But certainly from a UK perspective, and I'm sorry that data is UK and not global, unsurprisingly. But it's pretty awful, frankly, it really is. So 5% at the moment against an average in the workforce of 20. I don't even have data on sexual orientation, but you may well have heard of Stonewall, which certainly my old company, National Grid, used to subscribe to, which has a lot of data and sort of best practice. And they list the companies that are best in this space. And there's not a single energy company or anyone bearing any resemblance to an energy company in the top 100. So, you know, it's a pretty poor show. Now, when I say that, I should just pause though and say, please don't mistake that there aren't some companies that are doing some wonderful things in this space. They're really trying hard, and there's some really good practice around. But at the moment, it certainly as a sector doesn't stand out as an exemplar. Why does it matter? Well, it matters on 3 levels. Of course, it matters from a moral perspective, making sure that society is well represented. You know, we're living through a time when there are debates going on right now, which you're all watching on the news as I am. And I suspect you're feeling like I do occasionally about, I can't believe we're having this debate. I can't believe in 2020, we're still even thinking about these things as questions that need answers to. It's just extraordinary. But those big issues that have boiled up, I mean, the Me Too issue in 2017 has definitely made a difference. Black Lives Matter, I think, is going to make a big difference. No organization can actually ignore and just sort of hide and say everything's okay here. And it's vital for our sector that we get on with this as well. And of course, that flips into the second issue, which is one of reputation. You know, the energy industry has a reputational issue given where we are in terms of our fight against carbon at the moment. We live in an era of super scrutiny, and the internet certainly made sure of that. And public expectations of our industry, you know, are incredibly high. So, you know, we should be leading, not lagging in this space. And of course, my third rationale, of course, is for humanity and the planet and our ability to actually deliver on the enormous challenges we're facing on getting energy to everybody in the world, and at the same time, battling climate change. That is a massive task. My old company, National Grid, here in the UK, actually issued a report about the net zero workforce of the future recently. And that estimated that the UK is going to need 400,000 new people in the sector by the middle of the century. Well, it kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? I think that if you're going to be recruiting that number of people, you want the absolute best, most talented people around, not least because the tasks that they're going to be facing are very complex and difficult. And you can extrapolate that for a different set of circumstances into every country in the world. If we don't throw the best people at net zero and access to energy, then we're not going to get there. So it's not just about females, it's about different ethnicities, genders, basically. We just got to get every brain we can on this. And that pie chart there is an important indicator, as well as the sort of heavily underlying issue behind this, I think, is, yeah, we need a lot of technology change, but you can see we need a lot of behavioral and societal change at the same time. And I could certainly criticize governments who just don't seem to understand that at the moment. And if you have a government that's made up of a pretty narrow section of society, it's not totally surprising to me at times that therefore you come out with policies that haven't captured the real essence of the way that people behave. Certainly here in the UK, the Climate Change Commission has said that we're 62% of all the emission reductions that are required to get to net zero require some kind of behavioural change. That's often in linkage with the adoption of new technology. So how can we ever implement that as an industry if we don't actually have a cross-section of society in the industry? So it's just at the key and the core, I think, of so many of the challenges that we've got. It's not about statistics. You know, any senior exec that's doing things because they think they're ticking a statistics box is missing the point. Without everyone, we're not going to get there. We've just got to have the biggest tent of talent we can possibly have. And as others have observed in all parts of the world, you know, this industry is going to be recruiting thousands and thousands of people over the coming years. A diverse modern energy mix has to have a diverse modern energy workforce. And I'm certainly determined that the Energy Institute, which is all about people in the energy system, is exactly what the Institute is all about. Now, we've got a passion for this. It's in our DNA, and we'll be sitting hopefully and continuing to persuade, cajole, influence, and help organisations to really make sure this industry is diverse and inclusive for the future. Thank you, Sinead.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I think that's definitely one of the pillars of creating a robust energy system. I think we've all seen the stats in various articles a number of times about how diverse boards and companies actually leads to more successful results for companies. So Thank you all for your presentations, and that leads us on quite nicely to the Q&A. So I have a few questions that have come through. So I'll start with this first question from Will in London. You mentioned the grassroots youth movements towards low carbon. Do you feel that these movements are impacting on the dynamic between current and future energy leaders? And I think that's relating to Kelvin. So Kelvin, what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, can you come again with the question?
Yes. So in your presentation, you mentioned the grassroots youth movements about low carbon. So how do you feel these movements are impacting on the dynamic between current and future energy leaders?
Okay, so I think one of the concerns regarding the impact in made is the opportunity that young professionals, young energy leaders actually need in order to, for example, make this impact, right? Because I've been opportune to meet with several young professionals who, for example, run a startup that has to do with, for example, trying to reduce effects of climate change and also environmental pollution and all. And recently, I had a conversation with one of them, and I asked him how is he going about this project? What point is he at? And of course, the response I got was, that's not what I want to do any longer. So I think I want to do something else. So the question I had to ask myself really was, what made him stop? Is it that he's not getting the right support? Is it that he's not being heard? And sometimes we're tempted to say that he's not persevering enough. Well, we can also look at it from that perspective. But if we bring in the dynamics of a country like Nigeria, for example, where he has to cross several hurdles, right? So he has to solve his transportation problem, he has to solve his energy problem, he has to solve almost all the problems that that he needs to really to get the impact made. Then I think it's worthy of him to say that he wants to do something else, maybe write a book or so. So I think my own perspective that maybe young professionals need to be given more opportunities, to be able to create more impact from the grassroots.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelvin. Abdul, a question for you. So it sounds like there's lots of exciting tech for smart cities, but how much will the success of it also depend on behavioral change? And that's from Nick in Berlin.
Basically smart cities and digital technology, its impact that is going to be making most probably should be positive, or I can relate that actually specifically depending on the individuals or people, how they're going to utilize it, whether it's going to be for the better good, or to some degree it could be abusive if it's misunderstood or not used in the right way. And so with that, smart cities should actually come to support more people's need and assist in progressing and developing not just people as a whole, but individuals, people as individual, so that people can basically grow faster and learn better, since more utilities they have, more opportunity is in front of them. So that all to a certain degree should assist them in making a better decisions, to make a better growth that can help them, and in some way or another can actually assist them in not only benefiting themselves, but also the others or the people surrounding them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Abdul. And now a question for Shada. In your opinion, how can developed or industrialized countries help underdeveloped and countries enact and implement energy policies that can help promote their environmental sustainability, but also help them promote economic growth? And this question is from Daniel.
Thanks a lot for that question, Daniel. It's very on point, I would say. Yeah, there's a lot to be done for different countries to kind of contribute their knowledge, the know-how, the technology, and so on. So I think previously it was through funding of different initiatives, through carbon credits and so on. So that was kind of the whether it's joint implementation or whether it's different initiatives by the UN. So that was kind of the setup that would be typically used, whereas developing countries would have initiatives and projects to reduce their carbon emissions and optimize their operations. And then developing countries that have targets to meet would buy these credits and purchase them, these carbon credits, and that would be kind of the mechanism that would work. But I think now, and looking towards the future, it would need to be a lot more, I would say, kind of more of a collaborative effect, and different organizations would need to work together to share that knowledge and to share that know-how and technology. And it's a matter of putting together the right policies for the right countries and the right circumstances. It's not just about even though it's a global responsibility for all of us, but then it needs to be really reflecting the right conditions in the countries. So I think that's something that would need to kind of be talked about a bit more and explored a bit more, perhaps in the next COP that's coming up, and to see how everyone can work together to achieve that. Thank you.
Thanks, Shahada. Absolutely. And there are some very complex discussions going on in some European countries, particularly in Germany, as they're going through their coal phase-out program. And there are whole communities that need to be considered to make sure that the efforts they meet to meet the energy transition and to help climate change targets actually minimizes the impact on local economies. If I can ask a similar question to Zubin, you mentioned the oil and gas industry and the steps they're taking in energy transition. I guess from your perspective in Aberdeen, do you feel that Aberdeen as an economy, or in general local economies, are ready to transition, and do you think they're ready to survive these changes?
So yeah, I guess you mentioned Aberdeen, which is something I can obviously talk about. I think there's been, if you look at the macro picture of oil and gas, you can see that there's obviously been two fairly distinct oil price crashes that happened. One in 2016, 15, and then obviously one now because of the COVID pandemic. And it's kind of really highlighted how, for example, Aberdeen is quite really focused on the oil and gas side. It's not just for the North Sea and the UK area, but it's also a technology hub for the rest of the world. And it's actually shown that Aberdeen is too reliant right now on oil and gas, and the council and other organizations are beginning to realize that they need to start to diversify themselves. So there is a lot of projects that are ongoing. There's even a test wind farm case that's off the Aberdeen coast, which actually houses right now the biggest wind turbine generator, and it was used as a part of their test. And then broadly speaking, there's a number of these offshore wind farms, these massive offshore wind farms, whether they be floating or tethered, which are starting to be handled to the Aberdeenshire coast. So there is a realization that the expertise that is in oil and gas, especially with these big capital projects, has a direct correlation and applicability to these renewable type projects where you've got these massive projects to be undertaken. So I think the past few years has kind of not been it's so far in advance, we don't need to think about it. But now I think out of pure necessity, in terms of we've had, the cost climate on oil and gas isn't great. And people are starting to see an opportunity, especially, even talking about the COVID crisis, they're seeing an opportunity to diversify now. It's actually quite heartening to see when you look at some of the, the European oil majors, like the likes of BP and Shell and Eni and Equinor and the likes of them, that despite the current pandemic, that even reinforces that idea that they need to begin this diversification process. And here, especially locally in Aberdeen, I'm glad to see that they've got the same message, because you need to put the investment in now. I mean, 5 or 10 years down the line, it's too late. There'll be other areas of the world, especially, that might have picked this up and have brought themselves to the fore with the technology base and the skill set and the skilled workforce. So I'm glad to see that they've realized it needs to happen now, because I think it was mentioned in most of our presentations, this kind of has to happen within the next 5-year to 10-year period. Otherwise, we're really going to be there's going to be a lot of issues going down the line.
Absolutely, thanks a lot, Zubin. And yeah, I agree. I've been really astonished and amazed by the amount of responsiveness that we have seen from the majors, and that's hopefully something that we can carry through as future energy leaders. So Steve, I guess running on that theme, you've worked, in oil and gas, heading up TSO, to renewables and battery storage. Your experience is incredibly wide. So where do you see the required level of investment to develop the skills and knowledge, and if possible, positive attitudes that are needed for young professionals, but also the energy leaders of today? Do you think that sits more with the government or the private sector? And that question is from Alistair.
Right. I think all these things always sit with both. Actually, they're shared. One of the comments that I think we were just hearing about, really, to a certain extent, is there's a notion of new skills. I think we've got to be a bit careful that we don't exaggerate that to a certain extent. I mean, a huge amount of the skill sets that exist in the oil and gas sector, for example, are just completely transferable into new energies. And we're talking about fundamental scientific, engineering, and financial skills here, and those things are transferable. You don't need to be an expert on designing a turbine or something, a wind turbine. So I'm more concerned, I think, about going back to, as we educate our children, opening up their minds to the opportunities that exist, and realizing that there's a place for them in the energy industry, and that their perception of the energy industry is, and all of the surveys would always say this, is sort of outdated in a sense. So we're all agreeing as well that it's the energy industry that's going to be at the heart of solving these problems. And yet you can talk to a lot of children today who say, but the energy industry, that's surely going to decline, isn't it? So I think that's a role for the private sector and for government. So one of the organisations I work with here is a careers organisation that gets people into schools, and that's where the private sector has to come to play, is interacting in a collaborative way, making sure that they're talking about the businesses that they're going to be tomorrow, as opposed to businesses that they were in the past. And there's great opportunities for all young people. That's the bigger issue, I think, as opposed to thinking about specific training. Sure, you get into technology and coding and understanding some of those things, but I think that's pretty much in play. I mean, that is at the heart of the way we're thinking about educating our children for the future anyway. So I think there's a huge shift here. Science, technology, engineering at the heart of it, without any question. But the sector needs to open itself up to just bringing in different sorts of people from different backgrounds. And it's got a challenge on its hands, as well as the government has, in explaining the fact that there are jobs for all sorts of people in this industry.
Absolutely. And Kelvin, I guess back to your views on grassroots programs. How do you feel about grassroots activism groups that are inside organizations? So would you join an industry to create change from the inside, or do you feel that as an industry, we can attract the 2/3 today that do not want a career in oil and gas, and are keen to change it from the inside? Do you think that applies in your region, Kelvin, or the attitude's quite different for young professionals?
Sorry. So I think the attitude is quite different, because looking at it from 2 points of view. First is the security, or rather I'll say the assurance that a lot of young professionals really need, especially regarding their jobs, today, because many times you realize that if the young professionals are going to want to cause these changes internally in their maybe current workplace, for example, there are a lot of concerns, right? If that aligns with the company objectives, what will the company think about that? What will be the consequences? So many times you realize that a lot of young professionals prefer a situation where they better do this from the outside, right, rather than doing it from the inside. And I think also the second point is what sort of do the industry, for example, encourage young professionals inside to better create these changes? Is there that flexibility? I don't know. I think it's better to say if young professionals feel that they have the flexibility, to sort of create that needed impact. Also, one thing that I have noticed is that these changes, or rather this impact that is being spearheaded by young professionals many times seem to be centralized. So I've had the opportunity of moving around 11 different cities in Nigeria, for example, and what I've seen is that in these different cities, the activities can be quite low, and everything seems to be centralized in one or two cities, for example, in Nigeria. And the question that I would ask myself is it possible, to encourage young professionals in these different cities where activities are low, to be more engaging, really, and to better, see how to create this impact, irrespective whether they're in the industry or not. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kelvin. I also have a very, very interesting D&I question that I'd like to direct to Steve. So it's from Suzanne, and she asks, do you have any thoughts on including socio-economic deprivation as a measured factor? We know even in the UK, background and social class have a major effect on young people's chances of progressing into professional work of any sort. Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Hallelujah. One of the things you said up front was be punchy, Sinead. So I'm struggling to think of how to be punchy in response to that, in a sense. I mean, Suzanne, I've spent a lot of my last 10 years actually as CEO of National Grid, involved in all sorts of activities in the UK here for business in the community in particular, which is targeting, how can we get at some of our deprived communities? How can we get them better educated and closer to the workplace? And actually, in some of the things I'm involved in again at the moment, we're absolutely on that from a business perspective of trying to, and it is a government priority, and that's how it doesn't slip here, as well as we think about the economy coming out of COVID here. But the facts are well known. I mean, it's all clear. You know exactly where these communities are in the UK, and I'm sure this is true elsewhere in the world as well. And in my experience, you've got to take some real targeted action there. And that, again, is a combination of government action, local government action, and then businesses being involved and reach deeply into those communities. And it's often about help. It's about educational help. So one of the things we've got right now, I suspect all around the world, is those communities don't have computers, they don't have access to broadband, so their education is suffering. So that actually the divide is getting even bigger. So how do we fix that quickly? But then how do we just spend more time with those people who don't get exposed to business and careers opportunities? That's at the heart of it, trying to inspire people that there is an opportunity for them and then give them a bit of help. So it's a long, complex area. There is a lot going on, I know, but the statistics at the moment in terms of success, certainly here in the UK, aren't great. But there's been quite a campaign to try and get into those communities, and I don't think it's going to go backwards after COVID. On the contrary, actually, because of the reality of the divide's probably got even larger, it's going to require more activity, but it needs to be coordinated. Local government coordination with businesses as well.
Yes, definitely. And a very, very quick answer for you on this follow-up question. So renewable energy has been promised as some kind of sustainable solution socially as well as environmentally, but my feeling is that the social aspect of sustainable energy, including on diversity, is failing. Why is that the case? And that's from Marcus from Birmingham.
not sure I understand the point about the social side is failing. If you're talking about what I've just been talking about in terms of society and the imbalances in society, then I'd completely agree. You know, we're not making any steps forward. If anything is said, we're probably going backwards at the moment. But you know, we've made massive success. I mean, renewable energy is a fantastic success story, isn't it? In all of our lifetimes, you know, where we are today in Europe and other parts of the world as well, after 10 years is just remarkable. There were, you know, really intelligent senior commentators in the energy industry who would have said that the amount of renewables that we have on systems today around the world would have been impossible. I mean, they even used those words, you know, impossible. That we couldn't handle the system, and we've blown through all those things and proven that's wrong. We've just got to keep going. We've just got to keep going. You know, and everyone has commented, which I comment on regular occasions as well. We're not going to do that without the oil and gas industry, without the expertise of the oil and gas industry, but they need to move faster into this space. There's some rhetoric going on again today in the newspapers about, you know, that's not the right answer. We should almost ignore the oil and gas industry and let all the new companies get this space. That's just rubbish. It's just, we're not going to deliver if that's the case. Sure, we need some new technology, startups and things in here, but we absolutely need the expertise of the oil and gas industry to manage this transition in all of its aspects. That's not just the production of energy, it's the distribution of energy, it's the charging of it, you know, all the things that you know about. It's a different energy system for the future. And as part of that, I guess is Marcus's point, I would beg all organizations to think about their role to society in terms of the people that they employ and the jobs they have in the communities in which they interact with, to do more than just make money, but to think about that as really it's a part of their DNA. What are we doing, not just for our business, but what are we doing for society in general?
Absolutely. So we have a few minutes left. So I guess just some very short closing remarks from the rest of you. Shada, very quickly, what are you most confident about when you look to the future of the energy system in your part of the world?
I think I would say definitely the change in attitudes that we're seeing now. I think we'll hopefully have more of a push from everyone, from all the young professionals in the field, rather than just a pull from policies and so on. So that's what I'm most excited and confident about.
Great. And Abdul, I guess on your side, when you look at the energy landscape in your part of the world, what part is inspiring you most of all?
That will be actually the development of or research that has been ongoing regarding renewable energy. And so I can see like part of, you know, in Asia Pacific specifically, we're looking at more solutions to renewable, to the current situation in terms of the energy, and specifically stressing more into renewable energy. And specifically saying, because in the oil, basically in Asia Pacific, it's depleting at a faster rate, and because basically the reservoir, well, when it comes to comparing it to other maybe continents or let's say the Middle East, where the reserve is quite a huge thing, a huge amount. And so with that, there is more research ongoing on solar panels, solar technology. There is green energy, hydro green energy, and more toward that area, which is, I believe it's quite good. And hopefully with more people basically realizing, this should actually accelerate the development.
Fantastic. It's great to hear that coming together of the oil and gas industry and renewables. And a very, very quick last question for Kelvin. Do you think developing countries such as Nigeria are actually ready for the energy transition and to transition away from fossil fuels?
That's a very interesting question, because in my opinion, I would say I don't think we're ready, because for example, I mean, looking at it from a policy point of view, I think it was sometime last year or early this year, a bill was passed that of course there should stoppage of importation of generators to Nigeria, and only specific organizations or people were allowed to report. And if you don't fall into that category, then you will be handed over a jail sentence. So now, we all start wondering, really, okay, so why are we moving? Why is the shift? So yeah, plenty of concerns, really. The distribution system is not well done. So we can't say that there's power, really. So, and all of a sudden, people have to now go to jail if they import generators. So I don't think that we are ready for that yet. But one thing that I'm sure of is that, and that's why I like the idea of the Generation 2050 project. That a lot of young people can be helped, really, to sort of situate themselves better, and to take the bull by the horn and see what can be done, and whatever they are doing to do more, really, and try to seek for partnerships, both from other parts of Africa. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a great thing about this Generation 2050 project. There will be a lot more coming out of it under the banner. So that's all we have time for in terms of the discussion, but watch this space. There will be a podcast series. There'll be more editorial content. There'll be more webinars coming up. So it's really going to be a rich experience for the rest of the year that you'll be seeing from the EI and Young Professional Networks. So thank you so much for joining. As I said before, as soon as you exit the webinar, you'll be taken straight to the survey. Please, please, please complete the survey. We really, really want to hear your views, and we really want to give young professionals a platform to discuss climate and energy global challenges. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for your insights and your really interesting views, and educating us a lot as well on some of the technical areas. And also, I'd like to say thank you to our supporting partners, IBM, Repsol Sinopec, Energy UK's Young Energy Professionals Forum, and University Alliance. And that's all from me. Watch this space, and I hope you have a good day.